Hey everyone, welcome to Troubleshooting Tuesdays. This is Selena here, and I want to say hi to everyone. And I've been having problems with the connecting live, so I've not been doing this lately. It's just kind of been on my back of the list trying to figure out what's going on with my computer. I've got a few little glitches here, but I think I got it today. So I'm hoping that I can do a screen share. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to because there's a lot of my controls are not there like they usually are. But what I wanted to do was to go over MTHFR and the neurotransmitters and getting a little bit more info on that. I hear that a lot from people, and I get this from my clients a lot too. Most of my clients also get genetic testing, and the MTHFR gene comes up so often, or some of those other genes like MTR, MTRR. So what do all of those mean? And especially what do they mean in a practical sense whenever we look at how does it affect our health? And if I have these genetic SNPs, what kind of supplements do I need to go take for that? So the first thing that we want to do is we really want to scrutinize these genes and look at the entire picture. Just getting one or two genetic SNPs doesn't really help us, especially when just because we have a SNP doesn't mean that it's expressing. The key is the expression, and the expression means how is it behaving? How is it operating? You know, is it operating as a normal gene, or is it operating in the potential less operation as it has with the SNP? With SNPs, there's two different ways that they can be affected. One of them is it can slow it down, or in other instances, it can actually speed up the activity of the gene. So just because we have that SNP may not mean that we're going to have a deficiency somewhere. It could mean that we are going to be using up a lot of things. We're going to have excess. That excess sometimes can kind of have a negative deficiency somewhere because we're using things really, really fast. But it all again goes back to, is our body expressing it? Because the other really awesome thing about our genes is there's a lot of backup pathways. And so just because of a SNP here, you know, our body may be able to just bypass that, use a different, go a different route, and everything's all perfectly fine. Sometimes also we see in the SNPs where they counterbalance one another. So while this one's slow, this one may speed up, and so they kind of like level each other out. So that's why it's really important to look at the entire big picture. And then we also want to look at what are the symptoms that are going on, or any of the symptoms suggestive of those pathways having a problem. Because we want to look at, okay, the pathways, not so much as the SNP itself. And so in the MTHFR gene, it's connected to a lot of different pathways. And it's kind of the hub for many, many key things that happen in our body, and these processes that then generate, cofactors for other processes. So it kind of starts this domino effect. One of the big ones is SAMe, and you'll see that written as all caps SAM and then a lowercase e, and it's called SAMe is how you say that. And the SAMe is part of that methylation cycle, and it's going to help to go to all these other processes and carry that methyl donor. And why that's important in these neurotransmitters is most of the neurotransmitters that we need, they're going to be dependent on SAMe. So if MTHFR is not working right, we're not going to have enough SAMe, which then downward spirals to we're not going to have enough neurotransmitters. So that's like the basic overview of that. It gets a lot more complicated than that, but that's just the general connection to those. So that's what we see in autism, ADHD, we see anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar, all these different kind of neurological labels that we get for these different diseases or whatever kind of disorder they want to label us with. Those things are all connected to that methylation cycle. And so the methylation cycle, we're going to have, like I said, that SAMe is going to go over to our neurotransmitters, but also in part of that, SAMe gets recycled, and that circle just kind of keeps going around and around and around. After the SAMe, the next big one that we often hear about is the homocysteine. And homocysteine can keep going back around and make more SAMe, or the homocysteine can go down into our detox pathways. That's where we're going to detox things like heavy metals. And so again, we look at autism and ADHD and some of these different things. It's like we see a lot of times heavy metals are implicated in saying, hey, that's a problem. Well, if that cycle's not working right, our body can't detox. So now we can't detox, and we've got these neurotransmitters that just are not working well. And it's kind of like this double whammy, and it's not just 1 + 1 = 2. It's more like 1 + 1 = 5, 10, 50. It just kind of really starts escalating because each cycle is going to reach other cycles, and then it's a magnifying effect, not just an addition. And so when we go to that SAMe and it's not getting made, we got to look, okay, what are some of the other cofactors? What are the nutrients that our body needs to make that cycle work well? Well, we're going to see things like vitamin B6, B12, magnesium, zinc, vitamin D, vitamin C. Those are some of the key nutrients that our body needs. And one of the things that comes up quite a bit in the autism and a lot of these other labels is using things such as melatonin, or we're going to get some vitamin B12 injections. And if you watch my autism webinar, it was a pretty long webinar. I got pretty, got pretty in depth on that, but I wanted to go over really quick on like the melatonin, because I hear a lot of melatonin, not just from clients and in discussion groups people asking about it, but also practitioners are asking, say, what should we do here with melatonin? Is the melatonin the right thing to do or not? And so one of the things that we talk about a lot is the melatonin is at the end of that tryptophan pathway. So tryptophan is one of our neurotransmitter pathways, and we have the tryptophan, and it's going to go down into 5-HTP, which a lot of people hear that supplement, they'll take, oh, I need to take more 5-HTP. And that's because 5-HTP is needed to connect to serotonin. And then the serotonin is going to go over down to the melatonin. And in that process of the serotonin to melatonin, we need SAMe. And so that SAMe, if that methylation cycle is not working, guess what? We don't make melatonin. So we're not going to be tired and things. And then as the serotonin backs up, it actually slows down our body clearing out the dopamine. And so now we have like this really big excess. And now it makes a lot more sense whenever we see that as to why just that one MTHFR gene really being off, how it all of a sudden now we're not going to be able to sleep. We're going to have excess dopamine. We're going to have like these excitatory type symptoms, which fit right in with the ADHD and the autism and all those sort of things. But then there's another side that even gets worse, because on that tryptophan cycle, it can also go to the other side, which is called the quinolinic acid and the chironine pathway. And the quinolinic acid is another excitatory pathway. And if you go to PubMed and you put in quinolinic acid and autism, you would be surprised at how many studies that they know and confirm that, yes, this is a very problematic pathway for those with those labels. And so supplementing with the melatonin is going to stop our body wanting to put things in melatonin, because we've got the melatonin, so it's not going to try to make any more melatonin. So that tryptophan pathway now is going to go over to that quinolinic acid pathway, or has the potential to go that way. And so if it's already like one that's going to shift that way, we don't want to be adding more stuff to it. What also is going to contribute to that quinolinic acid is stress. Stress is a huge mediating factor for that pathway. Now, on that pathway, there are some really good parts of that pathway. It's the chironine pathway, and that comes before you get to the quinolinic acid. So that actually is very protective. So there's a reason why our body puts things to that pathway. There's a protective component to it, but it's when it gets to be excessive and long-term, things spill over to the quinolinic acid, and that's where it becomes very damaging, and then it's like a very catch-22 type scenario. So that's one of the reasons I'm really not a big fan of saying, oh, let me just give you some melatonin so that you can sleep, because it's going to just have so many other backfiring effects. And also we need B6 in that pathway. So we got the B6 that we need, we have the SAMe, so supporting that way nutritionally can do so much more than just giving the melatonin. Plus it lets our body regulate what it is that we need, because we can never really fully regulate as good as our body can. Our body is responding in these ways because it's trying to protect us. Unfortunately, there's collateral damage when it turns into this long-term protection, and then it gets to be very, very snowball effect. And so sometimes it's like, wait, why is my body doing this? But if we start peeling back the layers and start looking at the core, and that's where the genetics can play a huge role, is that, oh, we have potential for these things to back up. So when we add to that, like the acid in almost all of our foods here in the US, that's going to slow down that MTHFR, because folic acid cannot be methylated. We cannot make SAMe out of folic acid. We need the folate that we see actually in nature. So whenever we are taking folic acid supplements, then we are already right there slowing down that cycle, because it can't be methylated. On top of it, it binds to the folate receptor sites, which makes it, again, it's another double whammy where our body has the natural folate. It's going to block those things. And so it's very, very important that if we have the MTHFR SNP or any of the SNPs, there's the MTRR, MTR, MTHFD, DHFR, SLC1, FOLR, any of these SNPs and these pathways, we want to make sure we're avoiding folic acid. And I would even advocate we should avoid folic acid without the SNPs because it's synthetic and it's not going to promote health and healing. It's not going to support the methylation cycle, which we need for detox, which we need for healthy balance of neurotransmitters, which we need for healthy balance of our hormones, like our female hormones, for our thyroid hormones. All of our different hormones need that methylation cycle for those things to work. And part of the reasons why it needs that is because our hormones have to get detoxed out of our body. So once our body uses the hormones, it has to clear out now the leftovers of that. And so it has to go back through and basically detox them. So if we don't have the detox capabilities because our methylation cycle is down, well, even our own hormones can now be problematic, which if you start to think about that, it makes a lot more sense now in these autoimmunity, because autoimmunity, our body is trying to attack these things. Well, if we peel back, why is it attacking them? Because things are there where they shouldn't be. Well, why are they there where they shouldn't be? Because our body can't get rid of them the way they're supposed to be able to get rid of them. And so when we take a step away from the conventional world, we just look at this from like a common sense. It's actually very simple. I mean, it's super, super complex, but basically the principles are very, very simple principles that we just have to work with the body, work with the way that it was designed to work, and support it when it's deficient. Don't just replace it with things. That's more of like a Band-Aid approach, and it's not going to really support long-term. Sometimes there are times when we do need to replace on a very, very short-term basis, just to kind of jumpstart and kind of get things going. But it's always very temporary. It's not like a long-term replacement. I don't have any of my clients that it's a long-term replacement. I suppose there probably is, the exceptions. There's always an exception, but as a general rule, we just want to jumpstart and then get things going and support nutritionally and then lifestyle-wise, and then supplements as needed, when needed, but very specific reasons. So if you guys have any questions about, some of the neurotransmitters, some of the questions that I've gotten just this last week, I've had from clients, some friends, and then I've had some different events. They all ask me, what about depression? What about the anxiety? It seems like I'm taking, whatever the supplement is, but I shift from one to the other. And these methylated vitamins, am I supposed to take the methyl, folate, the methylcobalamin, hydroxycobalamin? Which one of these things am I supposed to take? And so that's where I'm like, okay, first off, we have to look at that big picture, because that's where we can get into trouble on some of those supplements. As we shift the body from now it doesn't methylate to now it's like all of a sudden it has all these nutrients. It's kind of like if we had a funnel of water, and how much water, and all of a sudden we just dump a whole bunch, it's going to overflow. So we go from not having a much water to overflowing, and then we're taking our body back and forth. And so that's where that big picture comes into play, and that's where I usually recommend the organic acid test. And that is an OAT test. You usually see it just written as OAT. And that's going to tell us how is the exhaust system basically of our body. It doesn't really say, okay, these are the neurotransmitter levels, but it tells us the byproducts and some of the things that happens in these processes and the metabolites of those things. So we know, okay, here's what's going on inside because this is what we have left over. So it's kind of like a backwards way of looking at it, but we can kind of see where the deficiencies at, where their excess is at, and then we can put those all into context with the symptoms, and we lay over that also the genetic SNPs. That's when it gets super exciting, because then we can see that, oh my goodness, this SNP, yes, it looks like we should be slowed down, or we have the potential to be slowed down. And indeed, our organic acids show that there's a huge problem in that pathway. So it really helps to give us some answers. Now, sometimes we don't always get the answers that way. Sometimes, you know what, we don't have a SNP there and we have a problem, or we have a SNP there, but there's no problem. But either way, it still gives us a lot of insights as to what is going on, and that way we're not guessing. Because if you don't need methylated vitamins, there's no sense to take them just because you have MTHFR, because we can really push that neurotransmitter pathways, which goes back to, we need to address things in a certain order. We have to start with the detox, because if I support you and say, okay, hey, we need to give you a bunch of methylation, get those hormones going, if the body can't clear them out, now it's stuck with all this extra stuff, and it's going to escalate things. And that's why I see so many people say, okay, I go from anxiety to depression. I'm taking these things and I felt really, really good, but now I feel worse. And now I have these other symptoms that I didn't have before. That's because we're not first looking at, we've got to make sure that our drain is going like we had a toilet. We don't add more stuff to it if it's clogged. We have to unclog the stuff first and then work our way up. And so the hormones will usually work themselves out once we get things unclogged at the bottom so that the stuff can flow through and we support it healthily. That's usually a much, much better approach and much quicker, much, much faster approach and easier. There's a lot less symptoms, like negative symptoms that we have with that. The time when we have a lot of symptoms that add to that are usually when there's like bacterial infections or there's pathogens going on or yeast and fungal molds, those kinds of things that we have to take into account because those also can mess with those pathways. And so it gets to be, that's where it gets to be very, very complex. And so when we look at for pathogens, we can look at that OAT test as well. It's going to tell us more of like the small intestine area. And then the comprehensive stool test is going to tell us more of the lower part of the GI tract. So between the two of them, we get a really good picture of, hey, what's going on here. The OAT test not only gives us the exhaust, but it can tell us a lot more about like yeast, and molds and potential for heavy metals and those kinds of things. We may have to do a few extra tests after we kind of get, okay, yeah, this is very suggestive of those things, so we might need to confirm, but it gives us a really good picture. And then the stool test that we use is the GI map, and that's a complete DNA-based test. So it doesn't matter if the bacteria come out and they're not alive, because most bacteria do not do well in an oxygenated environment. So most of the tests are culture based, which means they have to be able to grow them. So if they don't really live well in an oxygenated environment and they don't grow, we get a lot of false negatives. And H. pylori is one of those that we see a lot of false negatives with, except for in the GI map, because it's completely DNA based for the H. pylori. So the H. pylori, it doesn't have to be alive. It doesn't have to be in a viable state. We're still going to pick up on it because whether it's alive or not, the DNA is going to pick up on whether or not you have that. And so that's why I really like the GI effects. I used to use Genova. Genova does have DNA based on the microbiome, which is really, really good because it really breaks down the microbiome. GI map does as well, but not quite as in detail. The Genova one gets really detailed on the microbiome, which is fantastic to know all these different bacteria on the microbiome side of it. But from when we are starting the journey, we really need to know, first, we got to get rid of the pathogens first, because we've got to stop putting fuel on the fire so we can start putting it out. We can't start putting it out if the fuel is still going on the fire. So that's why I usually start with the GI map. And then, you know, if we need it later at some point, we really need to, okay, tweak things and figure out what's going on microbiome wise, or there's still some things that we're not getting from the GI map, then we might do the Genova. But otherwise, I start with the GI map for that. And so between the two of those, and then if you add on that genetics, it's like this great picture. And of course, always getting really into the history and listening to what your gut is telling you, that whenever you say, you know, I think this is going on, and where in the conventional world, they usually ignore us of like, oh, that doesn't matter. No, those things do matter. So really listen to your instincts and write those down. I do have some sheets. You guys can reach out to me that I can share. I'll try to upload them to help you get you started on your journey. So, okay, these are the symptoms that I know that just my heart is telling me there's something connected to that, because there probably is. More than likely there is. You just got to find the right practitioner and say, oh yes, that's telling us this pathway, and connecting those things, because there's so many things that our body can tell us, and we have these instincts. I think as moms and women, we know these things, you know. I mean, it's just, I think, built into us to have that sense of, you know what, something's not right. So I encourage you guys to nurture that and embrace that instinct that we have, because once we start paying attention to, or we always pay attention, but once we have others that are supporting us on that, I think it really helps us to start healing, especially when it's our children, because our children, like, we just have something that we know about our kids, and it's like, okay, I know what it is, there's something there, I'm not sure what it is, but there's something. So I encourage you guys to make sure you guys are nurturing that, and always feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, or say, you know what, I'm thinking this, I just don't understand, or you know, you're stuck anywhere. I always enjoy talking with you guys. So that's pretty much, if you guys have any questions here. Let's see, I see Anita said it's overwhelming, especially when, yes, it's very overwhelming, Anita. There's so many things going on that it gets to be extremely overwhelming, because there are, you know, A affects B, B affects A, so there's catch-22s, and there's a million catch-22 scenarios where, you know, you get in this really bad cycle where you're like spinning yourself, your wheels around and around and around. And so yes, I totally understand that frustration. We went through that frustration with my son for quite a while. It was during our transition from, we thought we were doing really natural, we pretty much did natural herbal type medicine. And whenever he was diagnosed with autoimmunity, you know, we thought, well, we're doing it all right. And so, but we were still taking a symptom approach, and I just didn't really have the connections to say, okay, here, let's step back, because we were kind of in both worlds. We really weren't sure, okay, the conventional world says this, the natural world says that, and then you're so overwhelmed. And it was once we started connecting with others that, like, yes, there are ways to address these things. And yes, you're not crazy as a mom for realizing that these things truly are connected. So once I started really embracing that, and I had others supporting that, and then I started learning more about the functional approach to health, it's like, oh, all of our natural herbal training and natural medicine, you know, these things are very valid, and it's totally, that's what our body's designed. So anyway, but yes, you're right. It's very, very overwhelming, and feel free to, like I said, reach out to me, and know that, you know, that's what this group is for, is to support one another and, you know, to encourage one another, because this is a very rough journey, especially whenever we are going against, you know, some of the conventional ways, and, you know, feels like we're all alone. So this was all I had today. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. I will try to be on again next week. Hopefully, I think I have the kinks worked out on my Facebook Live thing. I wasn't able to share the screen though, so I had some slides that I wanted to show you guys, because I think it helps, at least for me. I like to see things, the pictures, and maybe I'll post those in the comments below so you guys can see what I was talking about on those pathways. But that was it, and it was great seeing you guys, and I hope to see you all next week, and you guys have a wonderful, wonderful week. Take care.